Now I want to introduce someone very special up here on the stage. So before he comes up, I want to just give you some background who we have here with us. So his name is Roger Crawford. He's a best-selling author, one of the most sought-after speakers in the whole wide world. He's been hired to speak at Apple, Amazon, Nike, Google. Everyone has paid him money to come speak, and we have him here tonight. He's an NCAA Hall of Famer, and every Monday night you can find him on the Tennis Channel, but tonight you can find him here on stage serving you at this conference. Let's give it a round of applause.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Oleg. Thanks, my friend. Thank you.
All right.
Hi, everybody.
Before we start, Roger, I have a few questions for you.
Sure.
Right? You weren't just going to get off the hook that easy.
No, that's fine.
All right. So, are you happy to be here today?
Absolutely. Thrilled to be here. I want to tell you why I'm here, by the way. Genna, who's here, is the teenage ministry leader. And I have been friends with, my family and his family have been friends for years. It's amazing how God works. When your family first came here from Belarus, you know, their English was somewhat limited. And but what connected us was our faith. And your family has been such a tremendous blessing to me and to my entire family. And I know your mom's here, Tanya. And I mean, you're like family, right? And when you called me and asked me to come and speak, I just didn't want to pass up this opportunity and see families here tonight. I mean, I'm just abundantly blessed. So yes, I'm thrilled to be here. I've never spoken in front of a Slavic audience before, but I did go to Henry's wedding.
Tell us about Genna's wedding.
And I drank kvass, right? Did I say that right?
You said it right. You said it right.
Yeah, and ate a lot of Russian nuts. Those great desserts.
The dessert ones.
Yeah. I don't know what the Russian word or Ukrainian word or Belarus, but yeah, to answer your question, I'm just thrilled to be here. So thanks.
Right. We're very happy that you're here. The stage is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleg. Well, good evening, everyone. So I spend my time speaking to different groups around the United States, speaking to a lot of corporate groups. Tonight, I'm not here to give that type of presentation. I'm not a pastor. I'm just a person whose life has been transformed by God, whose faith changed the trajectory of my life. And I am so thrilled to be here tonight to share a few words with you and kick off this conference. By the way, I just want you to join me in thanking all the people that planned this conference. I mean, isn't this amazing? Please, let's give them a hand. Really. I mean, I know you as Henry, Genna, so I'll just tell you that I know that you all put in a tremendous amount of work, and I know my contribution is a very small part of what I know is going to be an amazing conference. So it's wonderful to be here with you this evening. My youngest daughter is named Alexa. A few years ago, Alexa was head cheerleader, valedictorian, and class president in the 3rd grade. And so she comes one day and she says, Daddy, I'm so excited. I've already talked to my teacher. I want you to come and speak at my school during an assembly. Now, as I'm sure all of you can imagine, I'm so touched that my sweet, precious little girl wants me to come and visit her school and give a presentation. But I thought it was important that we discussed the day. I said, honey, do you realize that if I stand in front of all the boys and girls, they're going to know about your daddy's hands and about his legs? Honey, I just want to make sure that you'll feel comfortable with that. Here's what she said. Daddy, God made you to be an inspirational speaker. It really touched my heart, and then she explained. She said, yeah, Daddy, you got a peace sign on one hand, a thumbs up on the other. That's a great way to explain it. God made me to be an inspirational speaker. Well, he certainly didn't make me to do rock, paper, and scissors. I'll tell you that. I'm not very good at that. I was born with a physical challenge that affects all 4 of my limbs, from the elbows down and from the knees down. Now, you may be wondering if my physical challenge impacts my life today. And yes, it does. And the young people can relate to it. You know what it limits me with? Selfies. Stretch out as far as I can. All I get are mug shots, right up close. That's all I get. I have 3 toes on my right foot and a partially developed lower right leg. And I was unable to walk until I was 5 years old. You know, I can remember as a young boy, seated outside on my parents' front porch, and I'd watch all the neighborhood children play outside. And you know what I was thinking? I wish I was just like them. I really questioned, why did God give me hands like this? I mean, kids point at me and make fun of me, and I can't do everything that all the other kids can. I can't run and I can't jump. Why me? And whenever I would get discouraged, the person that I would turn to was my mom, an amazing woman of faith. I remember asking her this, Mom, why was I born this way? Here's what she used to tell me. Well, honey, it's because you're not a carbon copy, you're an original. That's good. Then I had to ask her the most difficult question of all. Mom, why do kids tease me? Why do they make fun of me? And my mom used to say this, honey, that's just a weak person's imitation of strength. I had an audience member come to me and say, you know, Roger Crawford, that quote that you attributed to your mother, I think Eleanor Roosevelt said that. Now, Eleanor Roosevelt was former First Lady of the United States. You know, she was a woman of integrity. And I looked at this person, I said, Eleanor Roosevelt, I find that hard to believe that she would steal that quote from my mom. Because, you know, my mom was my hero. I can remember, you know, being on the playground for the young people in the audience. You can relate to this. You know how kids often say this, hey, my daddy can beat up your daddy. And I just look at this and say, that's no big deal. My mom can whip him too. My parents believed that someday I'd be able to walk. They found a doctor that changed my life, amputated the bottom part of my left leg, then reconstructed my knee. So this evening I'm wearing an artificial leg or prosthesis. I want to tell you about my mom. She has Alzheimer's. She doesn't know who I am. But a few months back, when her memory was a bit better, she asked me this, honey, can you come and speak at Daycation? Now, Daycation is in Rockland, California, and it's a place where people go that require memory care, and there's about 40 people every day. So I stand in front of the group and I give a presentation. There's a young lady in the front row. Here's what she said, Roger, I'm 94 years old. And I'm going to remember your speech for a long, long time. That's faith, don't you think? My life is not different than your life. Because, my friends, no matter who we are, no matter our level of faith, our level of belief, we're all going to face some challenges in life. Wouldn't you agree with that? Some challenges you can see, like mine, and some challenges you can't. But nobody goes through life without some adversity. And it's during those difficult times, where do we turn? Where do we get that strength? Well, this has been my experience, and I bet it's been yours as well as people of faith. God can take what the world sees as a burden and turn into a blessing. A burden and turn into a blessing. I will tell you that if there was surgery tomorrow to give me normal hands and normal legs, I wouldn't do it. Because I look at my hands, and where some people may call it a disadvantage or a disability, I look at it as a blessing. Has it limited my life? You bet I'm a lousy piano player. Tried riding a motorcycle, couldn't apply the brakes. Rode around all day. Finally ran out of gas. When people ask me about my faith, and I've had people challenge me on this, frankly, they've said, you know, Roger, you were born with like 3 fingers and 1 leg and, you know, half a foot. How can you believe in God? And I always say, you know, because I've seen the transformative power of faith, of belief. that my hands that some people may think were unattractive and unacceptable, I started to see myself as God sees me. What I want to say to the young people today is I know it's especially true when we're younger. Sometimes we ask God, I want to be like somebody else. I want to be like somebody else. I want to be like somebody else. Look, Oleg introduced me. I'd love to be as tall and as handsome as he is, but it's not going to happen. And you know what? That's okay. Because God, you were made by God and for God. You don't need to spend a lot of time trying to be like someone else. You know what God wants? He wants your heart, He wants your faith, and He wants you. You don't have to change who you are. What I want to talk about tonight is God's power, God's presence, and His promise. How many of you have dogs at home? Quite a number of you. Well, we have 3 dogs. And I want to tell you how my wife talked me into getting these dogs. She said to me, honey, we've got to adopt these dogs. They're rescue dogs. I said, rescue dogs? What does that mean? She says, that means they're free. I'm going to tell you, there's no such thing as a free dog. Have you found that? Now let me tell you about these dogs. We have 3 of them, as I mentioned. We have one dog that had a stroke and has one eye, named Bella. We have another dog named Sydney, who was, you ready for this, fostered at San Quentin Prison in a program called Pen Pals. We actually got a note from the inmate that fostered her. And it was amazing. He poured out to us in this letter his Christian faith and how this dog had brought so much joy to his life and how he saw, God had brought this dog to him to really show how faithful God was to him. It was an amazing letter. And then we've got Boswell. Now let me tell you about Boswell. He's a Shih Tzu, found on the side of the road, was in poor health, went to the local SPCA, and finally we ended up with Boswell. So we have Boswell, I kid you not, for one day, 24 hours, Boswell has a medical emergency. We rush him to Loomis Basin Veterinarian Hospital. A lot of you know where that is. The veterinarian examines Boswell, comes back and says, Boswell's going to need some abdominal surgery. I said, wow, that's really bad news. I said, how much would something like that cost? He said, around $2,000. I looked at my wife, I said, honey, at least we gave him a good day. She said something to me that completely changed my attitude. She said, Roger, the dog would do it for you. So I took out my credit card. Now let me tell you about these dogs. The doorbell rings, the dogs, what do? To the door. You ever notice that? Dogs, they hear the doorbell, they can't wait, right? They run to the door and they just wait till that door's open. I thought about this the other day. The dogs have lived in our home for a number of years, answered every door in the Crawford household, and you know what? The door has never been for the dogs. But I want you to think about this for a moment. Whenever we knock on the door, whenever we seek out God, He's always there to answer. Always there to answer, always faithful. You can always count on that. That's something that we can be assured of in our faith, right? That God's not going to let us down. We knock on the door. We ask to have Him come into our life. He's going to answer that door. Remind me of experience I had when I was younger. And I don't tell this story very often, but I thought that we have a lot of young people in the audience today, and I thought you might relate to this story. So I'm in school. I'm seated in a chair, and I'm listening to the teacher. And the teacher says this, okay, boys and girls, today we're going to make something for your parents. I said, wow, that sounds great. Said, we're going to take a piece of paper and we're going to take some paint and we're going to make handprints. Uh-oh. Everybody in the classroom turned, looked at me. Uh-oh. I can't do the handprints. All the kids are going to laugh, make fun of me. So my teacher came over and said, Roger, I want you to do the handprints with everyone else. I said, I can't do it. I'm handicapped. He said, you're not handicapped, you're my student. Yes, sir. So he brought over the piece of paper, and I placed my hands into the paint, then onto the paper, and I printed my name. I write with two hands, Roger Crawford. My teacher had a great sense of humor, said, Roger, I'm so glad you put your name on those handprints. They're still awake. This is really good news, Ken. It really is. I fold up that piece of paper. I placed it in my backpack. I saw my school bus driver, Mrs. Torchiana. I unfolded that piece of paper. She said, your parents are going to love those. And she was right, because that afternoon, I saw my mom and dad, and I showed them that picture of my handprints, and they placed it in the most prestigious art gallery in the world, the Crawford refrigerator. Now I'm almost 60 years old, and here's the truth. I love to make the refrigerator. I do. You know, when our kids were at home, the refrigerator was covered with their stuff. You know what I did to make myself feel better? I bought a new refrigerator. I put it out in the garage. I hang all my stuff on that. Now, making the refrigerator is a worldly example, but I want to put it for a moment in heavenly terms. I want you to think about this for a moment. Right now, you're on God's refrigerator. You're on God's refrigerator. And you know, that to me, that visual, I find so comforting and is a reminder of God's power. That in putting our faith in Him, He can turn those burdens into blessings, and He can also then bless others. Because you then have a testimony to share with others of what God has done in your life, the power that you've experienced from God's love. You know, I was driving from Canada into the United States, and I was stopped at the border by a guard. He walked up to my car and he said, "Sir, are you a United States citizen?" I say, "Yes, I am." I said, "May I see a form of identification?" I said, "Well, certainly." I reached into my wallet and I pulled my license out and I handed it to him. And he looked at my hands and I could tell he was a little startled. The truth is, and this strength, by the way, this strength does not come from me. There was something that I had written in my notes, and I want to share with you. I just want to have a quick aside here, because I've been really thinking a lot about this presentation tonight, and I thought about how to put it together, and I reflected back on Pastor Sherwood Carthen. A few of you may remember Bishop Carthen. He was part of the Bayside family of churches, and he had a Bayside church in South Sacramento. He passed away a few years ago. And he's just an amazing, just spirit-filled man, and I just admired him immensely. And so one day I said to him, I said, "Bishop, tell me how you put together your presentations." Now see, think about what I was asking, right? I'm asking something that was, that I wanted to have that framework, right? Maybe how you put it together. How did you schedule out your notes? And he looked at me and he said, "Open up my Bible and I pray. I pray a little more. Finally, God leads me to the verse that He wants me to preach about." And I said, okay. I said, "Then, do you take out your laptop?" And said, No. I said, "Oh, okay, you take out your a pad of paper and start." No. He said, "I pray a little more." He said, "A little bit more, and a little bit more." And he says, "I pray about it till it gets into my spirit." He said, "Here's why." He said, "That way I know when I'm standing in front of the people that the message is coming from God and not me." In other words, he was saying, I needed to get out of the way, right? And let God use me. And I say that to you because I hope in some way that can happen tonight. That can happen tonight. That somehow maybe something that I say might trigger something in you. You might be reminded of God's power and His presence and be comforted by the fact that, you know what, I'm on that refrigerator. So, people ask me, how do I handle the fact that sometimes people are startled by my hands? Because it's kind of a regular occurrence. You know, like people will see me and they'll see my hands, they'll speak loud to me. They think it's like affected my hearing as well. And people say, how can you have really a sense of humor and accept it? Only through God. Only through God. Because when I started to see myself as I thought God might see me, then this was something I couldn't change. Couldn't change my hands or my legs, and you know what? That was okay. Because in life, you know, it is what it is, right? I mean, things happen, but our faith in God determines how we see what is. How we see what is. Mine's an experience that my wife and I had not too long ago. My wife, her name is Catherine. Genna knows her and very well, and I really have an amazing wife. But I got to tell you, we were high school sweethearts. Except she didn't know it. We were looking for a new car, and we went into CarMax in Roseville. A lot of you know where that is, right? So we walked in. We're looking for a car. My wife sees one she really likes. And I said, well, honey, why don't you go ahead and drive the car? First, she said, okay. So she hops the driver's seat. The gentleman who was accompanying us, a very nice young man, he sat in the passenger seat. I sat in the back seat. Driving down the road. I'm listening to the conversation. Finally, I hear my wife say, do you mind if my husband drives the car back to the showroom? So, well, of course not. That wouldn't be a problem, but he hadn't seen my hands yet. So I opened up the door, sat down in the seat, and I grasped the steering wheel. I wish you could have seen the look on that guy's face. I mean, he didn't know what to do. He's looking at me like, oh, all right. So he thinks, oh, maybe I'll inject a little humor. He says, oh, sir, I notice your hands. Can you drive? My wife didn't miss this opportunity. She said, no, not really. This is his first time. He didn't forget us, I'll tell you that. So the border guard came back to my car, and he asked me these 3 questions. Sir, where are you coming from? I said, well, Vancouver, Canada. How long have you been there? Said, only a couple of days. His third and final question to me was, where are you going? I said, Seattle, Washington. And I drove away from that border, and I was thinking about these 3 questions. Where are you coming from? How long have you been there? Where are you going? Had an opportunity of writing a book a few years ago called How High Can You Bounce? The book did fairly well until I spoke at the National Skydiving Association. They didn't like the word bounce very much. But I used these 3 questions as the framework for the book. But I'd like us tonight to think of these 3 questions in terms of our faith. Where are you coming from? I don't know if this is true for you, but I got to tell you it's true for me. Whenever my faith starts to waver a bit, whenever I am relying more on myself than on God, and we all know that when we do that, right, we usually end up in a place that we didn't intend to be because we're depending on our own thinking, right, and our own guidance and not on God. But every time that happens and I stop for a moment and I ask myself the question, where am I coming from? You know what starts to happen? I start to think about all the things God has done for me in the past. I start to think about some of the challenges that I've experienced, and I thought, you know what? Those challenges didn't defeat me because defeat is optional. But we know that when we walk through challenges with faith, that defeat is impossible because God has already won for us. So here's what I'd like you to think about tonight. I want you to look back on your past, and I want you to look at the evidence of how God has been so faithful, because this is absolutely true with me. When my faith starts to waver and I ask myself the question, where am I coming from? Here's what I realize. I'm forgetting what I probably should remember, and I'm remembering what I probably should forget. In other words, I am looking at it from a worldly perspective, but when I look at it from God's perspective, I'm reminded of His power and His presence that have been in my past life. I saw a great example of this not too long ago. I was speaking in a place called French Lick, Indiana. Have any of you been to French Lick, Indiana? No. Oh, you've been to French Lick. Why? You and me, that's it. I'll tell you, not too many people have been in French Lick. So I was there to speak to the school district. And I saw a great example of this question, where are you coming from? And how someone had used past experiences of how God had been faithful to him that he reflected back on periodically to sustain his level of faith and his reverence to God. So I get off the airplane, and I'm met by a gentleman named Dr. Roger Fisher. And I said to him, I said, Dr. Fisher, I said, I'm really thrilled to be here. I said, I got to tell you, I'm a huge basketball fan. And I know who grew up in French Lick, Indiana, Larry Bird. Now, you all are a youthful group, so a lot of you are probably thinking, I've never heard of Larry Bird, and that's okay. But you need to know this, and it's not about basketball, but he was an NBA superstar, one of the best ever. So I asked him I said, Larry Bird. He stops, and he says, oh, Roger. He says, Larry Bird, yeah. He said, have you read his book? I said, no, sir, I haven't. He said, if you did, Larry Bird was kind enough to mention me. I said, really? He said, I was his junior high school basketball coach, and I cut him from the team. That's why I'm a superintendent, not a basketball coach. Makes sense to me. We drive into French Lick, Indiana. They don't have Main Street, it's Larry Bird Boulevard, Larry Bird Museum, Larry Bird Cafe. He said, would you like to go by Larry Bird's home? I said, that'd be a thrill. So what I'm expecting, right, is this gorgeous home, and that's what I saw. Full-length basketball court next to the home with a Boston Celtic emblem, the team he played for. But that's not what I remember. What really stood out to me was his statement of faith. This dream home, full-length basketball court. You know what he said? He wanted his childhood home in view. So when he came home and when he would leave, he was always reminded where he came from. And if you read a little bit more about his story, he had many, many challenges in his life growing up. But he credits God for giving him the strength, the courage, and the wisdom to transcend those adverse conditions and become the superstar that he was. But he said, I had to stay close to my faith. And that's why I always had to be reminded of where I came from. I thought tonight maybe you could just reflect on that. Because oftentimes it's easy as we go through life, we can overlook that. You know, I was reading about the word wisdom because I'm working on a new book, and I looked up wisdom in the dictionary. I was really struck by what it said. It said wisdom is experience, and we all know that, right? It's walking through life. But that wasn't the important part. Here was the second, experience and reflection. So it told me that living life doesn't necessarily give us wisdom. It's actually intentional. It's going back and evaluating life experience that give us wisdom. How long have you been there? Gratitude, my friends, is a powerful force. Gratitude every day, thanking God on a daily basis, and making sure that every day you carve out that time to say to God, thank you. Thank you for loving me and blessing me. And the third and final question, where are you going? When someone asks me about optimism, here's my answer. I always say, optimism, to me, when you're a Christian, optimism is a natural byproduct of faith. And here's why. Because we absolutely know where we're going. And see, when you know where you're going, you can walk through life with confidence, assuredness, power, courage, because we already know where we're going. I played a little bit of tennis, and a few months ago, I had an opportunity of playing in Serena Williams. A lot of you know Serena. I got to play in her tournament that she had, and it was really, really exciting to do that. But I got to tell you what I learned playing Serena Williams. Here it is. Positive attitude doesn't work every time. That's what I learned. But you know what's interesting about tennis? When you boil down tennis, it really comes down to this: consistency. Consistency. It's more important than perfection. And I want you to think about that from a faith perspective again. What does God ask of us? See, God knows the human condition. He's not asking for us to be absolutely perfect, but I'll tell you something that he does ask of us, and that's consistency. That's consistency in our prayer life, consistency in our belief, staying aligned with God. I can remember when our kids were small, and I would take them to the pool. And I'll never forget, they always used to say to me, I'd take off my leg, right? And they always say, Daddy, cover up your leg. And here I thought, well, maybe they're embarrassed of me, right? So I'd cover up my leg. And I asked them, and they got all, so why'd you want me to cover up my leg? They said, well, we didn't want you to burn your leg like you usually do, so we wanted you to cover it up. And so we jump in the pool, and the kids would shout out 2 words over and over again. Watch me. Watch me. Watch me. If we ever doubt God's presence in our life, let's reflect on the fact that we are God's children. God's children. And when children call out those 2 words, what happens, right? We watch them. So God's promise to us is, watch me. Watch me. And we can be assured of that, and I hope that that fuels your faith. I've been a coach for the Special Olympics, and one of my athletes is named Emily, and Emily has Down syndrome. And I remember the first time she saw me, she looked at my hand, she looked at hers, looked at my hands, looked at hers. Finally, she thought, this dude needs a little encouragement. She says, Roger, I'm handicapped too. Bless her heart. I put my arm around her. I said, yes, Emily, I understand. She said, yep, I had my appendix out last year. And I saw something that was so beautiful, so memorable during a Special Olympic event. And I thought, what an incredible metaphor, illustration of what God does for us in our lives. So they all got down in position. It was a running competition. They got down in position. The gun goes off. They started to run. And boy, they were giving it their all. Everybody wanted to be the first one to cross the finish line. And they went around the second turn, the third turn. And then the unexpected happened. One of the athletes stumbled and fell. You know what happened next? All the other athletes turned around, ran back to that athlete that had fallen, and lifted that athlete to their feet. We're all going to have times when we get knocked down. But you know what our belief in God enables us to do? Never get knocked out. We can get knocked down, but never get knocked out. I had an opportunity of going to a funeral a couple years ago that to me was probably the best example that I had ever seen in my life. The most moving experience that showed me the strength a person can have when you believe in God's promise, that you believe in eternal life, that you trust God's word. Because the world changes, but God's word doesn't change. And those promises, if we can hang on to them, the hope that we can derive from them, even in the most dire of circumstances, is truly remarkable. And it can only come from something supernatural. It can only come from God. So I'm sitting in this funeral for a person who was a friend of mine. Her name was Deirdre Stanford. Deirdre was a very accomplished person. She had done a great deal of her life. She'd become a mother, had 2 beautiful children, a wonderful husband. Deirdre had faced some challenges in her life. This one in particular. Through her entire life, she never heard a thing. Completely, profoundly deaf. She's in her 20s, had just given birth to her second child, and she tragically passes away. I'm sure all of you can imagine the emotion that was in the sanctuary that day. To see the passing of such a young person with 2 young children. And the service went on. And then near the end, something happened that I will never forget. Deirdre's mother walked up in front. And she said this. She said, everybody here in the church, I'd like you to do me a favor. I'd like everybody to sing Amazing Grace. So everybody stood to their feet and sang Amazing Grace through tears and emotion. But her mother had a smile on her face. The song's over. And her mother said this. I want to thank all of you for singing my favorite song, Amazing Grace. She said, and I'm smiling because I know that my daughter Deirdre heard my favorite song for the first time today. That, my friends, is relying on God's promise. Promise that indeed burdens can be turned into blessings. You're on God's refrigerator. When you call out, watch me, He's there. You knock on the door, and He answers. Thought a lot about how I wanted to wrap up my presentation this evening. And this was the example that came to mind. A few years ago, there was a young couple that had been married for a few years. And they learned some exciting news. They were going to be blessed with a child. Now, we got a lot of parents in the room, and you know how exciting that is, right? It's such an amazing time. And, think about what you're going to name this baby, a boy or a girl, and how you decorate the nursery. I mean, it's just such a joyous time. And, well, they gave birth to a son. Now, this was a number of years ago. And when he was born, this couple was informed that their son had a number of problems, a number of challenges. And this couple told me, they said, Roger, we were devastated. I mean, we were able-bodied. We had an expectation of a perfect child. And now we've got a child with some problems. This was unexpected. We didn't know what to do, where to turn. They talked about seeing this child for the first time. They walked down this long corridor. They passed the newborn nursery. When my youngest daughter was born, Alexa, who I talked about earlier, she was 9 pounds, 7 ounces, 22 and 1/2 inches long. I'll never forget when she's in the newborn nursery, people would walk by and say, hey, I want you to say hello to my daughter. Oh, that's a big baby. Holy cow. So they went in the intensive care unit and they saw their son. And they started to unwrap him. And they told me, they said, Roger, we noticed that one of his legs was underdeveloped. And his other leg was bent in an awkward position. And they said when the baby lay down, his leg actually folded underneath him. And they said, we turned to the doctor and said, what does the future hold for our son? Said, I'm sorry, but your son will never be able to walk. Well, that little baby that I'm talking about was me. But this is not about me. Because here's how I began my presentation. I'm not a pastor. I'm just here tonight as someone whose life began with what a lot of people thought were some challenges, some difficulties, and I've seen God turn them into blessings. I've seen Him bless my life over and over again. So it's not about me. But I said I was going to talk about God's promise, His presence, and His power. And if we rely on that, if we put our life in His hands, here's what happens. What I'm going to show you is an Olympic torch that I carried. Now, there's many people that had the honor of carrying an Olympic torch. So that's not what makes this significant or important. But I'll tell you what makes this incredibly meaningful. It's because when we place our life in God's hands, what happens is that our life is transformed, and these three words happen in our lives. The words are Altius, Sidious, and Fortius. That means that we can go higher. We can be more courageous. We can be more faith-filled. Higher, faster, and stronger. So, where are you coming from? How long have you been there? And where are you going? You have blessed me tonight by allowing me to share a few words with you. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this conference and part of your church family this evening. Bless you, everybody. Thank you.